For your patience. With that, the full committee is in session for markup of the CFTC bill. Committee will come to order, and I note that a quorum is present and that each member has before them copies of the material on our agenda today. So I recognize myself for an opening statement. We are here today to consider a bill to reauthorize the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I want to thank Ranking Member Conaway and his staff for working with us through this process. The CFTC authorization expired in 2013, so it's long overdue, and I'm glad that we are here on a bipartisan basis to get this done. The newly confirmed chairman of the CFTC is also keen to have his agency
Mr.
formally
Chairman,
reauthorized.
I would ask for some order here as people file in because we want to hear you and your comments.
Would you please take your seats as quickly as possible? We need to get this done.
And close that other door, please.
All right, would you please take your seats or leave the room? You okay, Jim? All right, would you please be quiet while you're taking your seats? We'll continue. This bill before us helps strengthen our financial market infrastructure, and it makes it more resilient. It also combats fraud and promotes cooperation amongst regulators. But I think it's even more important that, to me, that we've done this on a bipartisan basis, and it sends a strong message to the Senate. The people that look to our markets for integrity don't care about political wins and losses. They expect us to conduct the business of this committee, and that's what we do. The best way to do that is in a cooperative, bipartisan manner, and that's what we're doing here today. So it may mean that some folks didn't get to see everything that they wanted in this bill, but even as chairman, I don't always get what I want in a bill, and I can tell you that from a lesson I learned in my earlier tenure as chair, and that's how the process works. But all that means is that you have to keep working to get bipartisan agreement on those issues that you care about, and we look forward to working with you on that. So I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Conaway, for any opening remarks that he may make, and again, compliment him and his staff for the way that we've been able to work this bill out.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many on this committee know, reauthorizing the CFTC has been a long-standing goal of the committee and me. The bill before us is a bipartisan bill, and I'm happy that we're able to include important priorities for many of the members who ring this dais. I'd just like to highlight two of those. Perhaps no issue is more central to the Commission's ability to regulate the markets in its jurisdiction than its capacity to evaluate and integrate emerging technologies. From artificial intelligence to data mining to blockchains, technology is changing the markets and the institutions the CFTC regulates. I'm particularly pleased that the bill before us includes the CFTC Research and Development Modernization Act in Section 118. Ranking Member Scott has led this fight, and his legislation will provide the Commission with the tools it needs for the 21st century to be a 21st century regulator. Another important provision in the bill is Section 104, which expands the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion and creates a dedicated internship opportunity for more minority students. Chairman Scott has been a champion on opening pathways for minority students, and I hope that these new opportunities will grow the pool of talented individuals overseeing and working in our derivatives markets. Today's legislation continues the important work of reauthorizing the agencies and programs under our jurisdiction, but I do want to caution that we're not breaking a lot of new ground today. This bill does not address important issues around the emerging world of digital assets, especially those digital commodities that fall within the committee's jurisdiction. There are many other outstanding questions around the growing spot market trading venues that I believe this committee is well poised to answer. We have a strong framework in the Commodities Exchange Act, which we can and should use to promote healthy, transparent markets and to protect customers. I look forward to working on these issues in the months to come. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and your staff for the work we've been able to accomplish on this bill, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Conaway, and now I'm pleased to recognize the chair of the subcommittee on commodity exchanges, energy, and credit for his opening statement, and also thank him for all of the work that he's done on this bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. As you know, issues surrounding the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission are very important to me as chairman of the subcommittee on commodity exchanges, energy, and credit. And I really appreciate that the work we're doing here today is both important and necessary. And I'm also very grateful for the bipartisan approach that we have taken as a committee in doing that work, with Democrats and Republicans working together. This bill takes great steps to provide integrity and transparency in our commodity markets, while at the same time building resiliency and fostering greater cooperation with international regulators. But there is one thing this bill does that I want to draw special attention to, because it is an issue particularly important to all of the people of our nation. This bill will expand the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion at the CFTC and establish an internship program that will expand the ability of our students and our young people to learn on the job while at the CFTC, which is a great institution. The office will help the CFTC to assess the diversity policies as well as those of the entities it regulates. It will help to ensure diversity in the CFTC's workforce, as well as encourage the inclusion of minorities, women, and minority-owned businesses in the CFTC's procurement process. The bill will also establish and maintain a paid internship program for students from the 1890s historically black colleges and universities, schools that serve Hispanic and Latino students as well, and the 1994 tribal colleges and those schools that serve those territories. As those of us who are proud alumni of these extraordinary institutions, and anyone who has worked closely with these schools can attest that these great universities are brimming with bright leaders looking for a chance to excel. And it is our hope that through this internship program, that these talented students will capitalize on opportunities through learning at our highly distinguished Commodity Futures and Trading Commission, and that they would not have access to otherwise. This internship program and the provisions included in this bill are historic steps forward for the CFTC and are great reminders of what we all can do when we all work together in this extraordinary bipartisan way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the gentleman for his statement. I now recognize Mr. Austin Scott, who is the ranking member of the subcommittee, for his opening statement, and also thank him for his work on the bill.
Thank you, Chairman, and I want to thank you and Ranking Member Conway for including the CFTC Research and Development Modernization Act in this bill. I'm glad that this will provide the CFTC with important tools to research new technologies related to the Commission's mission. The final text represents a true compromise that addresses concerns that you and others have shared with me, but it still meets the goals of the underlying legislation. And so I look forward to seeing the new innovations in technology that the Commission is able to research and use with these authorities. And I want to take a moment to thank my good friend, Chairman Scott, for his stewardship of our subcommittee. And it's a pleasure to be able to work with a longtime friend on these issues, and today's markup is reflective of the close collaboration we've had over the years. Chairman Peterson, Ranking Member Conway, I appreciate all the work that you and your staff put in on this bill before us today. We have a bipartisan bill today because you and the others made it a priority for the committee to get it done. And so again, thank you, and I yield any remaining time.
I thank gentlemen for his statement, and without objection, the opening statements of all other members will be included in the record. So the bill, H.R. 4895, is now before the committee for consideration without objection. The first reading of the bill is waived, and it is open for amendment at any point. So right now, I want to recognize the council for a brief explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Section 1, short title. Section 2, table of contents. Title 1, policy changes. Section 101 clarifies that the definition of foreign futures authority includes foreign law enforcement authorities. Section 102 authorizes the CFTC to establish an honors program through consultation with OPM. Section 103 eliminates Energy and Environmental Markets Advisory Committee and establishes general authority for the Commission to establish advisory committees, puts all advisory committees under same rules. Section 104, establishment of Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, authorizes internship program for 1890 HCBUs, Hispanic, Territorial, and 1994 Native American serving colleges. Section 105 authorizes the Commission to accept assistance from other federal agencies as otherwise authorized by law, and to accept and provide non-reimbursable details from other federal agencies and details of employees with foreign futures authorities. Section 106, establish an Office of Chief Economist and outlines its duties, provides the CFTC with accepted hiring authority to staff OCE, amends the cost-benefit provisions of the Act to require Commission to coordinate with the OCE before consideration of cost and benefits for its rulemaking. Section 107 authorizes the CFTC in its discretion to provide an exemption to mandatory swap clearing requirement to bank holding companies and savings and loans companies if they have aggregated assets, including the assets of subsidiaries of $10 billion or less. Section 108 establishes that persons acting as commodity pool operators and commodity trading advisors acting on behalf of a charitable organization and/or church plans are not required to register with the Commission. Section 109 directs the CFTC to adopt rules detailing the content and availability of trade and trader data that other information that boards of trade and swap execution facilities must be able to access from a cash market in a digital commodity to meet their respective obligations to prevent disruption on their markets. Section 110 amends existing system safeguard core principles for market infrastructure to clarify that system safeguards should be resilient and protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data they contain. Applies amended system safeguard core principle to swap data repositories. Section 111 amends provisions affecting swap execution facilities, including to clarify that CEF emergency authority is to facilitate the liquidation or transfer of open positions on swaps as opposed to directly liquidating or transferring them itself, and to clarify that chief compliance officers may perform other responsibilities for the CEF provided there are no conflicts of interest between such other responsibilities and the duties of the CCO or that limit the CCO from carrying out its own responsibilities. Section 112 clarifies that the Commission can prosecute fraud and manipulation as it applies to activities outside the United States. Section 113 establishes protections to retain privileges for information shared by the CFTC as well as information shared with the CFTC, defines privilege to include work product privilege, attorney-client privilege, governmental privilege, and any other privilege recognized under federal, state, or foreign law. Section 114 authorizes disclosure protections to proprietary information obtained by or provided to the Commission, requires the Commission to adopt policies to safeguard such information. Section 115 authorizes authority to provide food and incidental assistance to foreign officials hosted by the Commission. Section 116 reauthorizes the Commission for fiscal years 2020 to 2025. Section 117 adds a reckless standard to the Commission's aiding and abetting provision. Section 118 authorizes to conduct research, development, demonstration, and information programs, included limited authority to procure items outside federal rules and accept gifts. Section 119 clarifies that when there's a shortfall of funds segregated for the benefit of customers during a commodity broker bankruptcy, assets from the debtor's estate can be available to make up the shortfall. Section 120 eliminates the double-sided confirmation requirement for swap data repositories. Section 121 establishes whistleblower protections for internal disclosures. Section 122 directed rulemaking to update standards for natural persons to meet requirements for qualified eligible persons through higher income and investment standards and indexing them to inflation. Section 123, Government Accountability Office Study on Aluminum Markets. Title II, Technical Corrections. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the council for the explanation. Does any member have a legal question for the council? Hearing none?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a legal question, but I would like to strike last word on the bill.
Yeah, we're going to have after we get the manager's amendment adopted, then we'll have. You want to do what?
Well, I'd rather speak during general debate on the overall bill real quickly, and then because I got another statement on the manager's amendment.
Okay. I recognize gentlemen.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a good bill that accommodates the priorities of many of our members on both sides. I want to briefly touch on Section 112, which permits the CFTC to pursue fraud, manipulative activities which occur overseas and have an effect in the United States. I believe that it's appropriate to give the Commission this authority, but also recognize that expanding Commission's enforcement jurisdiction can have unintended consequences. As we move forward, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can continue to work together to be certain, be as certain as we can, that this new delegation of authority is clear, precise, and does not interrupt legitimate business activities.
I appreciate the ranking member for asking, and as you know, this language was requested by the chairman of the CFTC as a way to preserve the Commission's authority to pursue fraud and manipulation which occur overseas but affects people in the United States, authority that the Commission has utilized for many years. I don't believe that added legislative language to confirm the Commission's existing authority should have any impact on legitimate business activities. But that being said, I agree to continue to work with you as we move forward to avoid any unintended consequences from Section 112.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Are there any legal questions for the council? Hearing none, I have a manager's amendment at the desk that I would ask the clerks to distribute. So I think everybody has a copy now. I ask unanimous consent that the reading of the amendment be waived. And I have a brief explanation here of what it does. Most of the changes in the manager's amendment are technical. There are two substantive changes being added to the bill. The first new section is this committee's response to the problems that we have seen with the European Union. Consideration of EMIR 2.2, potentially given the EU regulator, ESMA supervisory authority over U.S. clearinghouses. At a subcommittee hearing held earlier this year by Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Scott, the committee learned about consequences such action could have on U.S. market and market participants. The language is simple. Should the EU continue along the path of regulatory overreach, we ask the Commission to review the exemptions it currently has in place for market infrastructure and market participants to determine if they are still appropriate given the change in situation. We hope the Europeans will reconsider their actions, and mutual respect and cooperation among regulators are better approaches to foster effective oversight of these global markets. The CFTC believes in that approach, and I believe this committee believes in the approach, and hopefully Europeans will decide to join us. The other new section adjusts the conditions that must be met by affiliates to non-financial entities who hope to use end-user clearinghouse clearing exceptions on behalf of their non-financial affiliates. The ranking member and I and our staffs worked long and hard to reach a fair compromise on this language, and I am pleased that we could reach agreement. I would be happy to yield to the ranking member for any comments that he may have on the manager's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate you working with us on these final small amendments to the bill. This manager's amendment is a bipartisan product and one that I am supportive of. But before we vote, I would briefly touch on a topic that's been a long subject of intense interest to our committee. It's the difficult work of the international coordination of the new regulatory requirements. On this subject, our legislation makes a few important changes, two of which I'd like to highlight. First is Section 105, permitting the CFTC to exchange staff with foreign regulators. It is a change I hope will improve global regulatory coordination and build trust among international regulators. This new authority contemplates a hopeful path forward for international cooperation where trust and comity rule the day. To the extent that trust cannot be built among those regulators and foreign jurisdictions continue to seek to impose direct supervisory authority over U.S. regulated entities, this legislation will also include a second provision. The amendment before us includes language that directs the Commission to re-examine the appropriateness of the exemptions that we extend to foreign jurisdiction and to curtail those accommodations in response. This is an issue that Chairman Scott and Ranking Member Scott held a hearing on in July, and one which I believe unites our committee in opposition to the European Commission's attempts to impose direct supervisory authority over our domestic CFTC-regulated clearinghouses. Taken together, these two provisions give our international colleagues a stark choice, one of mutual respect and cooperation, or one of antagonism and recrimination. My hope is the path forward is the former and not the latter, and with that, I yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen. As I understand it, there's some members that I guess are requesting to make statements or comments on the bill. Your opening statements, as I said, are going to be made part of the record. If you have any other comments, that'll also be made part of the record. But if you insist, you could strike the last word and would give you 5 minutes to speak. But I would, if that's going to happen, I would ask unanimous consent that any remarks that are going to be made would be limited to 2 minutes. Do I hear objection to that? Hearing no objection, so does any member wish to be recognized for debate on the amendment? Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word. Thank you, Chairman Peterson, Ranking Member Conway, and Subcommittee Chair and Ranking Member Scott for your work on this bipartisan CFTC reauthorization bill. I'm glad that H.R. 4895 expands the CFTC's ability to go after bad actors who are committing fraud internationally. It improves their ability to cooperate with international authorities, and it increases protections for whistleblowers. I'd also like to spotlight an incredibly important provision in the bill, which establishes an internship program for students attending 1890 land-grant universities, 1994 land-grants, tribal colleges, Hispanic-serving agricultural universities, and students in agricultural programs in U.S. territories. As a proud two-time graduate of the largest public HBCU and 1890 land-grant, North Carolina A&T, and as founder and co-chair of the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus, I strongly support the inclusion of this program to support young talent and increase diversity at the CFTC. Again, Mr. Chair, I thank you for an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, gentlelady. Any further? We'll go by seniority. Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you very much. Move to strike the last word. A lot has happened since CFTC was last reauthorized in 2008. Markets have collapsed. Farmers and small businesses, excuse me, face financial peril. The American people lost faith in the ability of their government to protect U.S. markets and our economy. This committee knows best the CFTC's important role in providing certainty in futures and swap markets for farmers and businesses. However, I've heard concerns from industry creating jobs in my district that the new standard for extraterritoriality in this bill is overly broad and could have a chilling effect on non-U.S. market participants when they think about whether to go into business with U.S. commodity markets participants that would be subject to vague standards that does not include a direct tie to U.S. commerce. I'm looking forward to working with this committee and as we try and correct some of the issues. I'm happy to see, however, that we do have a bipartisan bill here and that we've gone back into the mode of working together to bring legislation to the floor. So I would be in favor of supporting such harmonization as the process moves forward, and I yield back the balance of my time. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentlelady. Further requests? Mr. Van Drew.
Move to strike the last word. Thank you for allowing me a moment to speak. I want to first thank Chairman Peterson, Ranking Member Conaway, and committee staff for their hard work and time spent on this bill. It's a good bill, and it was done in a bipartisan manner, and God help us, we all know that we could use more of that in this House. I would also like to say I'm glad to see my bill H.R. 4325 establishing protections to retain privileges for information shared with the CFTC as well as information shared with the CFTC. Section 113 of the bill mirrors legislation and clarifies that the CFTC does not give up privilege when sharing information with other enforcement and regulatory bodies and will increase the effectiveness of cooperation with the CFTC and other enforcement and regulatory agencies. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Conaway, for working together to come up with a solid bill, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Further requests? Mr. Harder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on this legislation and for working to include the spirit of my bill, the Financial Watchdog Support Act, in the base text. The recession cost people their homes, their retirements, and their jobs. We can never let that happen again. Since then, we've taken important steps towards safeguarding our economy, and we should always be looking for ways to help them improve their rules and practices. Our financial watchdog organizations are the best tools in the toolbox to protect our financial system, and that's just what this bill is going to do. I also want to note that we worked with Republicans on the committee to modify my original bill and ensure it's bipartisan in this larger bill. I'm always looking for ways to work with folks on the other side to get things done, including Congressman Baird, who joined me to introduce my bill. I encourage all of my colleagues to support this bill and appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the reauthorization. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank gentlemen. Ms. Hayes.
I move to strike the last word. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The lady down front in the green dress.
I would first like to thank you and the Ranking Member Conway for your leadership in crafting this necessary bipartisan CFTC reauthorization package. I am particularly excited because a provision which I worked on was included in this package. That provision, Section 114, surrounding proprietary information, will ensure that the CFTC encounters is properly safeguarded. This includes disclosures of said information all the way to staff access to that data. On a day-to-day basis, due to the nature of their work regulating commodities trading, the CFTC comes into contact with large amounts of sensitive information. It is imperative that it be adequately protected. I am proud to have my bill included in this package and look forward to voting it out of committee today. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Mr. Halloran.
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman Peterson and Ranking Member Conaway, thank you for your hard work on reauthorization of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I know that this has been a legislative priority. Before my time in Congress, I was a trader at the Chicago Board of Trade and served on their board of directors. I know firsthand about the Commission's regulation and have seen its impacts on commodity markets. I'm looking forward to additional user protections. I'm pleased that the bill includes new provisions giving the Commission more tools to detect, investigate, and stop financial fraud. I believe giving the Commission the same tools as the SEC and banking regulators will better help the Commission's investigators. I have a concern about the decades of inadequate funding that the CFTC has had. And I think there's a critical need for Congress to consider increasing that funding in an increasing complex environment that the CFTC is under. Finally, I am encouraged that the committee included Mr. Scott's bill. I believe the commission could do better in hiring minorities and women. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Axney?
I move to strike the last word. Thank you, Chairman Peterson, Ranking Member Conaway, and your staff for all the hard work that you've done in piecing together a common sense and, of course, bipartisan reauthorization bill. I echo my colleagues in saying it's good to be part of a bipartisan group here. This legislation includes many provisions that strengthen the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and provides for good governance. I'm also happy that the legislation includes language from my Whistleblower Programs Improvement Act, which strengthens protections for whistleblowers that report wrongdoing or violations of commodities law. We should be protecting folks that do the right thing by reporting market manipulation or fraud and not expose them to being fired if they speak up. I'm glad to see this language is included in the bill, and again, I thank you, Chairman Peterson, for your hard work and leadership on this, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. Gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Thank you. I move to strike the last word. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, members of the committee, I want to commend everyone for their hard work and their bipartisan effort to produce this legislation. As was noted by both sides of the aisle here, the conversation as it relates to the FTC and our counterparts within the European Union, getting them to work in a reciprocal effort to coordinate the changes that are taking place on both sides of the Atlantic as it relates to these markets and the regulatory effect with the FTC, I think is very important to highlight. And there are differences, and we need to try to work on those differences. As the subcommittee chair on livestock and foreign agriculture markets, I want to engage next year with members of this committee and the subcommittee chair, Mr. Scott, as we try to work through some of those differences. Commissioner Hogan, who used to have the portfolio under the previous commission in the European Union, and I have worked over the last several years. He, in the new commission, is going to take over the portfolio of trade. He and I have spoken about the necessity of us to try to work out a lot of these differences between the United States and the European Union on not just GMOs, but other naming issues and factors that really hinder the sort of kind of robust trade that I think we'd like to see between the United States and Europe. And these are issues that we're going to have to work out. These regulatory issues that are encompassed in this legislation touches, but really does not go to the length, I think, necessary to address some of these differences that we currently have that we have to work through. So I want to commend the effort. I think these are other areas that we're going to have to work on in the next year as we try to, hopefully, we'll get a USMCA effort before the end of the year, and that will, I think, bode well if we do, toward trying to work with our European allies on these difficult trade issues. So I thank the chairman, the ranking member, for the work product here, and obviously we have more work to do.
Thank you, gentlemen. So of the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, the chairman, wants to close this off with a brief comment. So.
I certainly do. First of all, I want to compliment both Mr. Conaway and our chairman. It's not easy to pull a bipartisan bill together, but I think our entire committee will do a hats off to both of you for the appreciation and gratitude for the efforts that you all have put forward in bringing us all together. And my other point, Mr. Chairman, because Mr. Costa brought up an important point that indirectly relates to another issue that I am so glad you incorporated in your report, and that is this business with EMAR, which deals with our cross-border situation. And Chairman, Ranking Member Scott and I are very grateful that you really gave a strong statement there. For those who may not be aware, the European Union now, with this Brexit business, is making a bold move with this EMIR, which is they are extending an effort to try to regulate our financial services industry in cross-border situations. We can't stand for that. I am so glad that you gave that strong statement, because we cannot put our banks, our market participants, our clearinghouses at a disadvantage to have them regulated by the European Union. And then on top of that, the European Union wants to fine us to pay for them regulating us. So this is a very technical situation. It's one of which that parlays with what you're talking. And I'm just saying I'm grateful for you in emphasizing that. And Chairman Scott and I are going to be at the point of the spear to protect our financial services industry so that they're not at a disadvantage with this Brexit and the European EMIR regulations effort. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank gentlemen, and I thank him and Ranking Member Scott for their work. So does any other member have requests? Hearing none, there will be no further debate, and the question is on the manager's amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Does any member have an amendment to the bill? Hearing none, I recognize the ranking member for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the bill, H.R. 4895, as amended, be reported favorably to the House with a recommendation that it do pass.
Is there any debate on the motion? Hearing none, the question is on the motion to favorably report H.R. 4895 as amended. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by saying nay. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The bill H.R. 4895 as amended is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Does any member wish to file supplemental, minority, additional, or dissenting views to H.R. 4895? Okay. Without objection, the usual instructions are given to staff that consist.
Blessed him, he sneezed, I blessed him.
What's that?
He sneezed, I just blessed him.
Okay. Without objection, the usual instructions are given to staff that consist of making such technical, clarifying, or conforming changes as are appropriate without changing the substance of the legislation. With that, the meeting of the House Agriculture Committee is now adjourned.